global spokesperson for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. She joins me now live from New York. Good to have you with us, Kathryn. So there are some, I think, 35 million asylum seekers and refugees globally, many of them living in very poor conditions. How worrying is it that anti-immigrant and anti-refugee sentiment seems to be on the rise?
No, you're absolutely right. This is an important issue, especially today on World Refugee Day. There are 35 million refugees in the world today. And just last week, we announced that there's 110 million people who have been forcibly displaced around the world. So that's the 35 million refugees. But let's not forget an additional 62 million people who have been uprooted from home, who have stayed within the borders of their own country. Now, you're absolutely right to raise that there is an anti-refugee, anti-immigrant sentiment that seems to be taking hold. But I think it's important to kind of calibrate that message and take this opportunity of World Refugee Day to kind of bust some of those myths around this. I think a lot of people have this assumption that, all of the world's refugees are trying to reach Europe, are trying to get to Europe. But the reality is that, 70% of the world's refugees, they live in countries that are neighboring their own. That means that people who have been forced to flee are staying as close to home as fighting or wars, violence, persecution will allow them to do. And I think while we have seen some overwhelming solidarity from the Ukraine situation across Europe, I think it's also important to shine a spotlight on countries around the world who have long been hosts to refugees, who take in refugees, given that so many countries have opened their doors to refugees around the world, not just across Europe. That's not the destination.
Yeah, as you say, quite rightly, most of the world's refugees and displaced people are living actually in low and middle income countries. Yet a lot of the focus is on those migrants who manage to get to Europe or who are trying to get to Europe. What do you think? What are your thoughts when you hear about the kind of policies that some of those countries, some of those European governments are putting in place to deter migrants? For example, the UK government talking about flying migrants out to Rwanda.
Absolutely. You know what that makes me think is that the very right to seek asylum is under threat in many places around the world. And what we've seen in the last year is that there have been 2.9 million people in the world who have sought asylum in the past year. That's the highest recorded number of people seeking asylum since we began, taking this data. So the right and the need for asylum is greater than ever, and yet we see places where that very right is under threat. That's why we're seeing last week one of the largest shipwrecks in the Mediterranean. People will continue to take these dangerous journeys by land, by sea, if it is not safe where they are. A refugee is someone who is fleeing war, violence, persecution. Until we take seriously the need to address what is causing forced displacement in the first place, people are going to continue to take these dangerous journeys. They're going to continue to risk their lives. And we're gonna see these numbers keep going up until we can address displacement at its root.
Right. So that was my next question, because it seems to be a no-brainer that if you want to slow the flow of migrants and refugees and asylum seekers, then you have to stop the reasons why they're leaving in the first place. Why is that not being more seriously addressed by governments which are worried by an influx of migrants?
This is the biggest question we have. We continue to ask, the Security Council, we continue to raise this, the idea that are we unable to broker peace and to stop the wars and persecution that are forcing people to flee in the first place? As we just heard, protecting refugees and taking care of refugees is a collective responsibility. And politicians need to take their job seriously to create peace so that refugees can go home. But they also need to take their responsibility seriously to support refugees. If 76% of the world's refugees live in countries that are low to middle income countries, those countries need support. Some of the largest host countries in the world include Turkey, Iran, Colombia. These are countries that need support, and we need to start addressing the very root causes that cause people to flee there in the first place, and to support those host communities who have so generously welcomed them.
Kathryn, good to speak with you. Thank you very much indeed for that. Kathryn Mahoney from the UNHCR there.